Lord of the Rings Online, a MMORPG 17 years in the making. Remember when the original iPhone was released, or Windows Vista? During the reign of World of Warcraft's Lich King, Guild Wars' Eye of the North expansion release, or Vanguard Saga of Heroes debut, Lord of the Rings came online and has remained a fixed entity within the MMORPG genre. What's brilliant about its gameplay philosophy is that you get to play as one of these guys. You even try to help save Helm's Deep along with hundreds of other soldiers. This approach helps preserve the fantasy of being heroic without being the hero, something with which Guild Wars 2 or even Star Wars The Old Republic struggle. But don't trust my word alone. I've interviewed nearly a dozen Lord of the Rings Online content creators and veterans, including Standing Stone Games' own community manager, to better understand why this MMO is so special. Positive reviews on Steam tend to emphasize how lore-accurate LOTRO is, how it preserves the journey so often rushed in other MMOs, whereas negative opinions focus on how problematic the Steam client is, and thus you can use the launcher on LOTRO's website, how outdated the UI feels, and how monetization can feel stingy. With that said, like Tolkien himself warned,
as a guide, I had only my own feelings for what is appealing or moving, and for many the guide was inevitably often at fault. Some who have read the book, or at any rate have reviewed it, have found it boring, absurd, or contemptible, and I have no cause to complain, since I have similar opinions of their works.
Just like not everyone will like Lord of the Rings trilogy, so not everyone will like Lord of the Rings Online. And that's okay. And remember, it took Professor Tolkien over a decade to finish the original trilogy, so LOTRO has time to gracefully mature. As Gandalf himself said,
"So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us."
So let's see if LOTRO is worth our time in 2024.
"Come forth!" they cried. "Let the Lord of the Black Land come forth! Justice shall be done upon him, for wrongfully he has made war upon Gondor and wrested its lands. Therefore the King of Gondor demands that he should atone for his evils and depart then forever. Come forth!"
The sense of playing a game is paramount to its enjoyment, whether you're optimizing your worker's utility in Black Desert Online to enjoy the open seas of EverQuest 2 introduction. The Lord of the Rings Online is one of the few MMORPGs that rewards players for taking their time and simply enjoying the moment. Justin from Massively OP reiterated this point in our interview.
You know, the journey is the reason you go through the game. That's the meat and the potatoes.
There are some games that are designed around rushing players to the so-called endgame, yet LOTRO's design palette emphasizes the ebb and flow, the warp and weft, the yin and yang, that both pull the player into moments of excitement, yet also abate intensity by seasons of recess. For example, the Shire is full of quests that emphasize preparing food and contributing to society, accented by the rolling green hills, a bright rainbow dotting the landscape. Or consider an equestrian nighttime gallop through the fields of Gondor, the lights of the sky smiling upon your journey, with the adjacent mountains resting from years of anguish. Consider the royal wedding, bright colors dancing and singing to celebrate the victory of light over darkness. Lord of the Rings Online is unique within the MMO landscape in that the gravity of playing the game is not primarily to level, not grinding some abstract currency to enhance a number on your gear, or boasting about some item level. While those routes do exist for those who do enjoy that style of gameplay, these paths aren't emphasized naturally. In fact, you can find veterans of LOTRO who have amassed dozens to hundreds of hours who haven't even ventured into the halls of Moria, seen the towering golden trees of Lothlorien, or even stepped foot into the archives of the last homely house to enhance their legendary weapons. Many don't have a maxed level character, and that's the point. The journey itself is the reward. To accent this point further is to emphasize that LOTRO's community is a feature. Standing Stone Games community manager even said that.
But we also have tons of players who want to put on plays, or you know what, I'm not really big into that combat thing. I really just want to tend a garden in the Shire. You can do that too, and our game allows you to kind of experience the world of Middle-earth in your own way. And being free helps in that regard too, because you don't have to necessarily commit a whole lot if you don't want to.
We all know that actions speak louder than words, and on July 19th, hundreds of players descended onto the Calendine docks to walk to Rivendell in support of Sail Indwin, colloquially known as Sally, a LOTRO content creator whose partner was a victim of battery. The community rallied behind them, raising thousands of dollars that will help them navigate the recovery process. Aubrey the Weird One, another LOTRO content creator who helped organize the event, said,
I hope that people realize that the community itself is going to continually drive this game. And as long as Standing Stone actually keeps plugging that in and working with that with the community, I think it'll be great.
LOTRO brings players together in other ways too.
I just kind of wanted to mention the strength of community in general. I think that is the biggest aspect of LOTRO. Yeah, sure, there's raiding, sure, there's some, the instances are great, the world is really awesome, but what keeps LOTRO thriving is the strength of the community and, their ingenuity.
One such vehicle is its robust music system that not only enables players to perform music by means of their keyboard, it also empowers bands of players to cooperatively perform songs. There are public performances each week in various places across Middle-earth, and massive yearly shows that draw in hundreds of viewers.
And I'm sure that some of this happens in other MMOs, but it's one of the things that I really like about Lord of the Rings Online, is that we've got the musicians and the performers, the poets, the lecturers, just all sorts of things that you don't typically see in a lot of games.
In fact, there's a whole subset of the LOTRO community that focuses on this type of content. To my knowledge, and veterans can correct me below, there are no mechanical benefits to engaging with the system. This diverges from Star Wars Galaxies or Project Gorgon system, and I think LOTRO could help develop its musical community if they provided benefits for listening. But the counter-argument is that the performance is the content. Anyway, the design choice rings consistent within the MMO, because the emphasis is less on the game and more on bringing to life Middle-earth. Players band together to put on large shows like Weatherstock. Bjorn Brand of the Lonely Mountain Band relays how they started performing music.
I went to something called Weatherstock, hosted by a kinship called the Lonely Mountain Band. It was this event on what's called Weathertop in the world of Lord of the Rings Online. It was this massive day-long festival with all these bands. I had never seen anything like that as a player event. And I decided to, oh wow, that's what I want to do. I want to get involved with that.
It's great to see a staple of Lord of the Rings canon embodied in its MMORPG.
Oel bereth Gilthoniel, Silivren Penamiriel.
Yet performing extends beyond music. Playful productions are another anchor in the community. In particular, clever players have learned how to utilize LOTRO's housing system in order to produce full-on plays with lighting, effects, singing. It's incredible. Having performed in large productions, I admire how complicated these performances are to orchestrate, and I hope more players can enjoy them too. Standing Stone Games community manager even said,
We've got some player events, like last weekend there was a play being performed inside of the game by a group of players, an actual theater troupe essentially inside of the game. That kind of stuff is what really keeps me happy and motivated. It's fun. I mean, it's definitely the fun part. So we didn't expect that people were going to want to stage into a theater performance at their house, but if you do, we're happy to support that.
Plus, during the Winter Festival, there are stages on which players can play roles or chairs supporting observers throwing snowballs in protest. Not to mention a dedicated role-playing scene in which groups of players enjoy the equivalent of full-on D&D campaigns that take place in Lord of the Rings Online. Those who have followed my coverage of Arlith, a role-play Neverwinter Nights 1 persistent world, should also take careful notice of serious, lore-friendly, in-character gameplay here. Since the quality of roleplay is inversely related to the size of any given community, I personally did not think to find such an active RP presence in LOTRO, yet one exists, and it's strong.
I see a lot of different RPers and a lot of new voices coming in. And so I would suggest to people listening, if you're into RP, then Laurelin is definitely the place for it. And not just that, Laurelin's community in general is really interesting. To me, it feels like it's one of the few places left that's a pre-2010 MMO server.
And he isn't alone.
Everybody has given us a world to play in, and so I am trying to do that for my kinship as well. But I think that for the most part, they've created a wonderful world to tell our stories in.
Those looking for a more modern experience while still taking Middle-earth lore seriously may find a welcoming home here in this virtual world. Speaking of lore, one of the main reasons why players continue to keep playing LOTRO is how carefully and thoughtfully Standing Stone Games has preserved Tolkien's vision in graphical form. Burning Embers, another LOTRO YouTuber, led me through a lore-focused tour, ranging from small references to The Hobbit, ancient Arnorian ruins in the Shire, a tunnel through which to meet Tom, and in historical reference to Tolkien's Writer Club, and even the planted sapling of the White Tree planted by Aragorn in Minas Tirith. This is just the beginning, and SSG's community manager even said,
folks like Chris Pearson, our lore master, was doing extensive documentation, not just about where we're at now, but where we want to be years from now. And so we have lore documentation like you would not believe. That is, it referenced to parts of the books, and some of that is also about making sure that we're adhering to the license that we have, where we can say use the books, but generally not the extended books that have been released. But even so, it really goes all the way back to extensive detailing of the lore, the settings. Here's how you make it work.
Sailorith, a longtime player, also emphasized LOTRO's careful handling of lore.
I think this has done a really good job of again, keeping the spirit of the lore alive and keeping within the parameters just well enough that everything that they obviously had to go outside of the lore parameters for, it doesn't, in most cases, outside of the sheer amount of the mobs, it doesn't feel outside of the realm of possibility. It feels very respectful, very possible.
Additionally, depending on the context, the writers even used alternate names for certain characters. During the initial invasion of Mordor, Gandalf is seen as Mithrandir. This is an Elvish Sindarin word meaning the Grey Wanderer. What's fun about its use here is that Gandalf, after defeating the Moria's Balrog on the peak of Zirak-Zirgul, replaced Saruman's position as the new White Wizard. So the juxtaposition between the Grey Wanderer in name versus the White in function is a powerful reminder of the Istar's diplomatic past, with his still pending future as a leader and executor of the planet's fate. The point here isn't that LOTRO is for nerds like me, but that it takes its own source material seriously. The world honors itself, and you can feel its internal reverence in every play session. An even more staggering detail is that LOTRO is massive. It took this YouTuber 14 hours to walk across its playable space, and that was 5 years ago in 2019. This approach is unlike World of Warcraft that functionally shrinks its game space in order to corral players into its most recent expansion areas. This is to solve a problem their own design created, yet ensures that the population has an appearance of being active, even if it may be a mirage. In this way, Lord of the Ring Online's design feels closer to classic titles that preserves the world as the environment in terms of PvE. From the frigid northern peaks and lush hinterlands of Ered the rolling, glowing hills of the Shire, the lush delta of Swanfleet, the foreboding halls of Moria, the tormented skies of Mordor, the mountainous reaches of King's Gondor to the hopeful shores of Umbar. You can feel Gandalf's words.
Far, far below the deepest delvings of the dwarves, the world is gnawed by nameless things. Even Sauron knows them not. They are older than he. Now I have walked there, but I will bring no report to darken the light of day.
Lord of the Rings Online is large not only with respect to the size of its world, yet also the array of content players can experience. The list is long, just like Tolkien's descriptions. To do justice to the activities, meet Marlem, Nydia, and an elven name I can't even pronounce, respectively, in the early, mid, and late game. The main heartbeat of LOTRO is its epic quest, the thread that takes you from the humble beginnings of any race you select, through the nightmarish, barren landscape of Mordor. Ranging from the shape-shifting Bjornings battling the tension to remain in their idyllic village and to confront the forces of darkness. Battle-hardened dwarves wrestling with the consequences of necromantic perversion. High elves who have stood against Sauron even millennia ago. To man, who comes face to face with betrayal and redemption. These tend to be more cinematic in nature, and they pull you close into the decisions and actions of the protagonists in the books. What's nice about this approach is that it helps contextualize the drama your character will experience in that you aren't the hero. Remember, you're this guy. Yet, Legolas' story has already been written. Gandalf's saga is already known. You must still write yours. Thus, unlike Elder Scrolls Online or World of Warcraft, in which you are central to the story, in LOTRO, you're an auxiliary, a supporting role that helps advance the mission of the Fellowship. This preserves the integrity of your character's place in the world, because narratologically, it's a bit jarring when you're the commander in Guild Wars 2 when every other person on your screen is as well. This separation provides LOTRO's designers with options to explore other modes within its rich narrative tapestry. For example, what happens in Mordor after the ring has been destroyed? What are the practical problems that must be solved when Aragorn becomes the next king? The climactic portions of these quests tend to feature the most voice acting, dramatic, vicarious experiences, and epic battles that bring you closer to the center of Mordor's foreboding shadow. We'll explore gear more in depth later, yet you tend to acquire important upgrades or even system-level enhancements through completing epic quests. To illustrate, as you begin the saga of retaking Mordor, you find yourself living as if you were Gollum, following the hobbits as they traverse the dangerous tunnels of Cirith Ungol. The impending presence of Mordor suffocates any gasp of hope, and your trauma ego, Smeagol, pulls your ethical threads apart, sucking you into the foul caves where Shelob, that giant ancient arachnid, lurks for unsuspecting prey. This sets the stage, the governing anchor to what comes next. You must secure entry to the Black Gate. But between your forward camp and Morannon is the living manifestation of Sauron himself. Hordes of orcs, goblins, and fell beasts packed together so densely that only clever adventurers can make it.
But here, neither spring nor summer would ever come again. Here, nothing lived. Not even the leprous growths that feed on rottenness. The gasping pools were choked with ash and crawling muds, sickly white and grey, as if the mountains had vomited the filth of their entrails upon the lands about.
Just when you penetrate through Mordor's doom, the confrontation between the forces of light and darkness collide, that erupt into all-out war.
Drums rolled and fires leapt up. The great doors of the Black Gate swung back wide. Out of it streamed a great host, as swiftly as swirling waters when a sluice is lifted.
Corrupted dragons encircling their prey, swarms of vile creatures being mowed down by sheets of arrows, all swirling within the cyclone of volcanic ash being spewed into the darkened sky. The battle rages as you run from hill to hill, saving your allies and pushing back the endless hordes of evil. But just as hope's final breath is ripped from the lungs of valor, a pause fills the air. The army of corruption is pulled back as if being sucked into a dying star. And suddenly, the Eagle Principate is summoned, and you must know what happened to Mr. Frodo. As you trek up the steep slopes of Mount Doom, your only companions are the howling wind and spitting lakes of fire. Against the backdrop of what represents the darkest form of evil rests two halflings. You're greeted with an axiom that voices the tonal change of the moment. And through your help, you call for rescue. But what happened on that mountain just before the gates collapsed? In the field of Cormalan, whose name in Sindarin is Golden Ring, an interesting juxtaposition to the Ring of Sauron just thrown into Mount Doom, the ring bearers recount those final moments on top of that mount. Just like avarice consumed Gollum, Mr. Frodo had been imprisoned by the ring's event horizon. It was in this dance of dalliance that Gollum's starvation for the ring literally provoked him to chew it off Frodo's hand. Yet, serendipitously, it was his succumbing to unholy hunger that broke the power of the ring's maker. It's after the dust settles that you realize the residue of wickedness still sticks to every corner of Mordor. It's up to you to clean it.
And as the captains gazed south to the land of Mordor, it seemed to them that black against the pall of cloud there rose a huge shape of shadow, impenetrable, lightning-crowned, filling all the sky. Enormous it reared above the world and stretched out towards them a vast, threatening hand, terrible but impotent. For even as it leaned over them, a great wind took it, and it was all blown away and past, and then a hush fell.
You're that great wind. The content is tough, and your progress is earned. But what about before Mr. Frodo departed from the Shire? If you played the original starting tutorials, then the pace may be slower, less dynamic, and comparatively incongruent when compared to more recent content, as it should be expected. But to SSG's credit, they released Before the Shadow, that adds an entirely new entry into the larger epic that brings the quality of the late game to the earliest level range. You start immediately confronted by the White Hand's influence in the river deltas surrounding Tharbad. It's here you're introduced to important characters in the developing conflict. But just like ancient ruins of men were scattered amidst the Shire, so the once thriving metropolis of the elves stood here too. But instead of reciting poetry and sparring with a friend, you're liberating the area from orcs and hellspawn. You learn that it was here that the One Ring was forged, and that your story is now forever intertwined with that of Middle-earth. The increasing pull of danger brings you to a nearby town that finds itself assaulted by the once living, and questions find tentative answers in a liminal waterway as you discover the source of the undead. But evil's reaching tentacles pervade even deeper as you find yourself delving an ancient tomb stirred by forlorn power. After a striking betrayal, you realize recompense will not be granted this day. Vengeance drives you on as you stumble upon a village recently sacked by the forces of Sauron. Its inhabitants look to you for help as you continue to discover your small part in the larger story of Middle-earth. In-game cinema orbits around announcing the new King of Gondor, Aragorn, and the political dynamic surrounding a royal leader. You are a herald, bringing the news both far and wide. The vistas are stunning, and it's some of the best world building I've seen in LOTRO. One of my favorite areas of design emphasis is Lord of the Rings Online Skybox. It feels like another actor within the game scene. It's vast, drawing you into the ever-expanding virtualization of Middle-earth. The biomes here are diverse, and the color tone and texture between each give a subtle variety that brings to life the various factions struggling to be united under the new king. The plot tends to take place in small courtrooms with a brewing plot of political intrigue and conspiracy. I admittedly found this portion of the expansion confusing, and we'll explore those critiques later. Regardless, your efforts eventually lead you to Umbar, a relatively unexplored area within Lord of the Rings canon. You can even ride a ship, in a sense. Washed ashore after being shipwrecked, the journey ahead beckons you onward. Because just like Mordor needed redemption after Sauron was defeated, so does the rest of Middle-earth. But with conflict comes combat. It's traditional in that you layer class and race-specific abilities over an auto attack governed by a combat tick that lasts about 1 second. You can queue abilities, so in theory, for every 30 seconds during a clash, you're going to be pushing around 30 buttons if you maximize the capacity. Something that I appreciate is that they deployed a stat squish that made combat numbers more easily digestible. So instead of dealing hundreds of damage as a newbie, you're grateful for a crit that breaks 40. Another incredible feature is that you can modify the difficulty of mobs in the open world, and by doing so, you reap unique rewards. This made adventuring in Mordor extremely thrilling and made fighting mice in Gondor nearly impossible. Justin from Massively OP put it this way.
Yeah, it's made the game so much fun. I think it's just because, again, it immerses you more into the world. Yeah, your choices really matter. Combat seems not just your choices, but your gear, your inventory, the moment-to-moment decisions you make. These are things we don't take for granted when we can just face roll over content. But when you actually have to claw for every little bit, but you can still do it solo, it starts to matter a lot.
It's a great way to test your build and knowledge of your class because you will eventually need to use every ability, every item, and mechanic available. For example, at difficulty 3 and above, mobs have a chance to be enraged, leveraging one of 6 buffs that change their speed, damage, mitigation, or other fundamental statistic. These buffs are called corruptions and must be removed by special skills or combos. Moreover, the Eye of Sauron can come upon you that, if not avoided, will deal a massive amount of damage. In practice, this AoE is more disruptive than fun, but the general idea of giving the player choice as to their preferred difficulty is fantastic. This feature has transformed LOTRO's overworld. You have to think twice about how you pull, how many mobs you're fighting, their types, and which are being corrupted to ensure you are prioritizing properly. I earnestly hope that the development team keeps improving this feature because it's one important vector that helps separate Lord of the Rings Online from other MMOs. Redbeard Flynn, a prolific MMO content creator, argued the following in our interview.
I think if there was one innovation that I really want other MMOs to look at and take from Lord of the Rings Online, it's this. Because I think we've seen this decline from 2004 onward of basically, we're going to make all of this stuff easy. And then the hard stuff comes, you get the choice at the end of the game. They're sectioning it off in this small part of the game, but the open world part of the game is just there as a function of, here's where you get your levels. And I think this gives the ability for players that want the challenge to get the challenge in the entirety of the game instead of just this one small part of the game. So I'm just now I want, after this, I want to go jump in and try it.
Lord of the Rings Online also does a compelling job ensuring that combat feels different across the classes. Let's start with one of LOTRO's most complex classes, the Warden. It has a very high skill ceiling with a fairly punishing floor, but once you understand its dance, it becomes unreasonably powerful. Even on higher difficulties, you can pull half a dozen mobs, including veteran and named, and mow them down. It's extremely satisfying, and the designers did such a good job rewarding skillful play, balanced by punishing poor performance. In fact, it reminds me of using the Insect Glaive in Monster Hunter or a Bard from EverQuest 1 in that you have many options at any given time, yet what's important is making the right choice at the right time. Warden's most basic feature is their gambit system. Most classes have skills and some skills that feed a specific resource that can be spent, but Wardens can create new skills when a certain array of prior skills were executed in a certain order. Each skill generates one of 3 builder resources, and you combine them into one of 36 gambits. But these 36 are really part of families that have 3 tiers of strength, most of which can overlap. So you can open a fight with Exaltation of Battle that steals life from your foes and becomes more effective the more mobs you fight. Then start building Persevere, Safeguard, then finally Restoration. Each skill grants different defensive boosts, plus provides additional healing over time. The brilliance of the design is that the finale, Restoration, is buffed if the other 2 skills are already active, so it becomes even more powerful. By the time you have all 4 gambits active, you have 4 separate heal over times, making you extremely difficult to defeat. And this is just one line of many different gambits, each providing their own unique situational benefit to solo or group play. When farming groups of mobs, I love to trigger Defiant Challenge that taunts nearby foes and grants a damage shield. I then trigger a Stored Gambit, mentioned above, that steals life from each foe. Then I trigger Restorative Shield that grants increased defense and heals me when I'm hit. I cycle through the Restoration Gambit series to keep myself alive, and if foes aren't already dead, I will begin the Desolation Gambit that's an AoE DOT. If a named mob is part of the pack, I will focus them down with the Cauterizing Steel series that emphasizes single target DPS. This is in addition to ensuring I have the proper oil applied to my blade for increased DPS against certain foes, and clearing corruptions from mobs by using Reversal. I'd love to hear other Gambit series from Warden mains in the comments, because I'm sure that I'm not only scratching the surface, yet leaving important tactical benefits on the table too. I learned the Warden by playing through Lord of the Rings online skirmishes. These are instances that scale according to level, group size, and tier. Mechanically, you fight waves of mobs and bosses. Plus, you can level a skirmisher, an NPC that not only helps you in these zones, yet also can be summoned in the overworld through items. Mordor was so difficult that I needed all the help I could get, including not only my summoned skirmisher, but also this dog. The captain is equally as fun, yet in an entirely different direction. This class reminds me of Age of Conan's Bear Shaman because your healing is a function of your battle prowess. For example, you can name a shield brother who becomes more tanky, and when you use Inspire, you heal them too. And since you have a pet, when soloing, they essentially become your beneficiary, and if you choose the melee-focused pet, you can help keep them alive when they're needed to off-tank. You can also mark a foe so that whenever someone hits it, they are healed. But you can also hit the marked foe with Valiant Strike, that when successful, heals your whole group. And you can layer on a standard that both DOTs foes within its radius and heals your teammates, so it's a glorious dance of damage and healing. I'm sure more advanced captains have better strategies to share in the comments, yet this is one of my favorite classes in LOTRO. Due to the class's flexibility, it was exceptionally easy to learn a few of LOTRO's other content systems: delvings, epic battles, and instances. The latter are instance dungeons, so if you've played MMOs before, you know what these are. Epic battles is a feature that I wish found more expression in other areas of the game. Instead of skirmishes in which you participate in a minor conflict, epic battles are just that. You're a part of Helm's Deep, or the Siege of Minas Tirith. They're large-scale PvE encounters that require a coordinated team to complete. There's a special progression system within this mode that would be far more interesting if it provided bonuses outside of epic battles. Delvings were introduced in Before the Shadow that have evolved to become more like Mythic Dungeons or Guild Wars 2's Fractals. These are short instance missions that can become increasingly difficult because mobs can become corrupted by malice conditions, providing an ever-changing array of conditions that you have to overcome to succeed. The newest class, the Mariner, is interesting. Based on fencing and swashbuckling, it attempts to capture the fantasy of fighting on the high seas. Being resourceful, chanting shanties, and having devastating tactical abilities are its foci. It's between the captain and warden because you have to manage balance, a resource that both opens and deactivates abilities based on your aft and fore stance. If you've seen a fencing duel, the impression is that the balance mechanic is an attempt to represent the stance of the duelist, in which leaning back is defensive while leaning forward is offensive. In reality, stances are based on the position of your feet, and you can move between either mode very quickly, whereas in LOTRO, the process of moving the balance needle takes a bit more time. Technicalities aside, if you use blue-colored abilities, you become tankier, and if you use red-colored, more deadly. If you overextend your aft or fore, then you become unbalanced and suffer a stun, then return to the neutral position. It's a very flexible class in that you can emphasize healing through bottle tossing, group buffs via shanties, damage through the duelist tree, or support by specializing as a rover. I've found it flexible at the cost of being functionally siloed, although I await corrections in the comments. Something else I love are fellowship maneuvers, a feature reminiscent of dual and triple text in Chrono Trigger. These are essentially EverQuest 2's heroic opportunities in which groups can use special abilities that work like the Warden's Gambit. In short, based on the number of people in the group, each player can choose a color, and the combination of colors generates a particular effect, ranging from a group-wide heal over time to every party member receiving a unique buff based on the color they chose. This adds an incredible layer to the dance of combat, and is a feature I wish more MMOs implemented. The last yet arguably most important component of your character's prowess is itemization. Generally speaking, Lord of the Rings Online system is fairly basic, and if you played WoW, you can hop in and hit the ground running. But where LOTRO is unique is their legendary item system. In my past coverage of LOTRO, I did not have the chance to personally experience the system yet, but now that's changed. I like to think of Path of Exile's equipment or gem systems as a parallel, because each legendary has a certain amount of slots into which you can add modifiers. You start at level 50 with a total of 4 slot types, with a 4 slot capacity that eventually grows to 11. You can add modifiers that improve not only your role, but also certain particular skills. While the implementation is a little clunky, the amount of flexibility it provides feels close to Project Gorgon's loot system, one of the best in the MMORPG genre. In my interview with Gin, he requested,
so you have 5 slots total under 2 allies for Words of Power. If instead you just had a pool of 10 traceries where you could switch freely, then that would solve a lot of the issues people have with it.
In order to acquire the modifiers, called words, you must travel to the Word Hoard in the last homely house and trade a currency called a tracery. There are layers to the system, some of which feel overbloated, yet the target to which this system is aiming gives options to players to emphasize their own preferred playstyle. Plus, you can level up your weapon, which reminds me of grinding for hours in Conquer Online to loot enough meteors to move it up to the next tier. Thus, between the crest and trough of the overarching conflict, LOTRO provides opportunities to explore the other manifestations of your character's growth. Remember when I said that not everyone likes LOTRO? First, it's an extremely common complaint that lag is ubiquitous. While the development team is aware, there has not yet been a final solution. Another area of concern is LOTRO's UI. It's thematic yet dated, and doesn't scale well with modern rendering hardware. I personally adore Guild Wars 2's GUI, even if mentioning it here is a false equivalence, so I hope that LOTRO's developers can find time to invest into a visual part of the game that every player sees all the time when playing the MMO. Something else I mentioned in my prior coverage is the strange dichotomy of being an ordinary hero. You're often tasked with doing boring chores despite having fought at Helm's Deep or helped Frodo on Mount Doom. I realize these types of quests are easy ways to monitor and promote retention, yet especially when they're part of the epic questline, they become more monotonous. Tolkien can be criticized for his laborious style of descriptive writing, yet at least he kept the focus on the story. Speaking of story, the Umbar expansion forces you to complete around 12 hours worth of content before even reaching the iconic coast. Aubrey even said,
It's a great vibe. Overall gameplay, though, from what I've heard so far, it just sounds like you're going back to Gondor for a lot of that at the beginning, and that's been the main critique.
I felt like I was doing something wrong because my experience did not meet the expectation communicated in SSG's marketing. This also extends to how travel is experienced. There isn't a clear way to know which stables are connected together, so it's hard to know the right path from Mossward to Mordor. When talking about so-called pay-to-win, LOTRO is very different from most MMOs, except that you can purchase level boosts that contain virtue experience. In PvE contexts, this is essentially pay-to-skip, but the problem is that in PvP, you bring your PvE tune to the battlefield. Thus, you can buy enough virtue to max out your passives, whereas there's no alternative for evil races. As a contrasting point, LOTRO is one of the few games that pays you to play, in that through completing certain quests, you can earn LOTRO points. While I personally loathe item shops in any MMO, I do admire the fact that you don't have to spend any money to play LOTRO. You can simply play to earn content at your own pace. In fact, a player from the Philippines has played LOTRO entirely for free through this system. He said,
The greatest thing about it is the ability to earn premium currency just by playing the game, and you can use it to unlock content.
Even though I detest item shops, I think it's equally incredible that LOTRO provides an option for such players to enjoy the rich expression of Middle-earth entirely for free, simply by playing the game. Thanks for watching, and subscribe for more MMO content.